All right, here we are. Welcome to another episode. This week with Greg Satell, who I have enjoyed reading about. I'm going to set up kind of two parts of his history. The first one is like, who is Greg today, and how does he spend his time? He is a best-selling author, international speaker, transformation expert, like kind of hold on to that term, and lecturer at Wharton Business School. He co-founded the ChangeOS, where he helps leaders drive lasting change and overcome resistance, written multiple books like Cascades, which I think is right over your shoulder, Mapping Innovation, and is a writer for the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Fast Company. So that's Greg today. But the reason that I find his story so compelling is that he spent 15 years leading major businesses in Eastern Europe post the wall falling, so post that 92 window, for what I would maybe call like 15 years of maybe the most interesting history out of the last 100, like ripe for innovation, just everything about that period. When I read about Poland or Ukraine, like he was in the middle of it. He was mixing and mingling with all the major power brokers. And therefore, he has these really interesting both stories and frameworks for, yes, leadership change, business change, but also societal change. So Greg, there's so much I'm excited to chat about, but I just want to start, this is out of like my pure curiosity. When I read about the mid to late 90s, the 2000s, in a place like Poland or Ukraine, I have a really specific mental image of like, oh my gosh, it's kind of the Wild West. People are making money. Everyone's moving fast. There's like democratic pushes. There's these authoritarian pushes. What did you experience? And I want the color commentary. Take us there, like in our imagination.
So when I got to Poland, it was the first really big year in Poland. The first year of major foreign direct investment in Poland was 96. I got there in January 97. So imagine everything is a startup. Yeah. Pepsi was a startup.
Literally.
Caterpillar was a startup. Everything was a startup, and everything was being run out of the Marriott because there was no office space in Warsaw. Everybody said about Warsaw, it had the double misfortune to be destroyed by Hitler and rebuilt by Stalin. Which is why they have this monstrosity called the Palace of Culture in the center of it. So picture the scene. You get there, and I know somebody who did this, a friend of mine's father, actually. He went there to set up Caterpillar's business. So you can only go really one of two places. Most people went to the Marriott. You needed office space, so you got you got an office at the Regis Center at the Marriott. And when you had to eat a meal, you went to the restaurant in the Marriott. When you went to the gym, you went to the gym at the Marriott. When you went to the nightclub, you did that at the Marriott. Everybody else was doing the same thing. So when my friend's father, he flew in for a couple of days, they had to arrange a partner for Caterpillar. So he flies in, he's got a little jet lag. He tells his partner, like, I'm going to go down to the gym and have a sauna. He comes back up. He said, yeah, I found our partner. And that's what it was like. Imagine all of Silicon Valley was being run out of the lobby of one hotel. And that's what Warsaw was like in those days.
Bro, I'm already picturing it. Man, that line, the double misfortune, bombed into obliteration by Hitler and then rebuilt by Stalin. Not someone who's well known for his beautiful architecture.
And
it
was actually mostly rebuilt by Khrushchev. But
sure, but
and one of the things most people don't know this, but around the ring, Moscow is like 3 superhighways. Ring superhighways is the entire city. It's a terrible place. But around the middle ring, they have 7 buildings called the Seven Sisters, and they're sort of the paragon of communist architecture.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Stalin decided to build one of these things in the center of Warsaw, and they call it as a gift. Of course, he made the Poles pay for it. But for 50 years or so, it was the only thing you could see from miles around. And it looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. It looks like the Dark Tower. The Poles call it Stalin's prick, this tower in the center of Warsaw.
Okay, wait, my next question, and I'm going to keep teeing you up because I'm so curious.
Well, it's called the Palace of Culture.
Lots of culture. Also
And
known
when
as
they
Sauron's
edit
Tower.
it, one of the wonderful so one of the wonderful things about Warsaw, there was a big debate at the time about the Palace of Culture. Many wanted to knock it down because it was
Yeah.
just this evil, foreboding presence. But then they decided not to, and they built around it,
Oh,
and now
gosh.
it's you have these incredible skyscrapers all around
Yeah.
it, and it just
No way.
looks smaller and smaller every year.
Which I don't mind. Okay, double click on, like, I can picture, once again, it's like a mix of the Wild West meets like Silicon Valley in the early days. But what was your experience of like kind of the what's the like the cultural ethos, or the like the temperature check of what most people were feeling in that like 96 to 2000
Yeah,
wave?
it was a time of incredible optimism, and
Yeah.
being an American in Eastern Europe was like being a rock star back then.
Wow.
And there was this it it ended up turning into other things because there was something called the Washington Consensus that was being pushed there, and it was like
Hmm.
the this the neoliberal um kind of zeitgeist, and
Yeah.
we were pushing policies that we would never accept in our own country, and in some places that went pretty badly.
Yeah.
But in Poland, for the most part, it went well,
Hmm.
and privatization went well, and it was this feeling that anything was possible.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
Also, it was very young. Almost
Yeah.
everybody running anything at the time was under 40. And everything had to be new. Everything had to be new. And because everything had to be new, there had to be a launch party for everything that was new. So sometimes you were going to 8 or 9 launch parties in a week. And so that's what we did. And every once in a while I'd say, Jesus, this is a little too much. I got to stay home. I'm
I
going to
gotta,
drink myself to death. And then you stay home for a night or two and you say, I'm going to ruin my career because everybody
I'm
I need to
falling
meet
behind.
out of the party every night. And this was especially true in media. And that's the business I was in. We
Yeah.
had a lot of fun, and it changed very, very quickly. And
Hmm.
so when I got there in 97, it
Yeah.
was like, I mean, so primitive, you
Hmm.
wouldn't believe. Like I said, people were running their businesses out of the Marriott. And another thing was when they moved out of the Marriott, usually they moved to these little villas in residential
So
neighborhoods,
interesting.
just right there in Mokotov. And so that was another reason. So in the summer, we'd all have parties in the backyard, but that's because there was no office space. Everybody was working out of villas. And then by 2001, eBay comes to town,
Hmm.
and the locals beat the shit out of them. They were gone in 6 months. It had become, so in the space of 4 years, it had become a very, very sophisticated,
Yeah.
very,
Vibrant.
very competitive place.
Wow.
Ron Lauder found that out the hard way, who
Hmm.
was, of course, the heir to the Lauder fortune. He had had big TV stations in a bunch of different places, including Ukraine, but also he'd had a big success in Slovakia and Czech. He came to
Hmm.
Poland, they cleaned his clock. So
No way.
that's that's sort of the defining thing about Poland. And
Yeah.
Poland, I used to, you're bringing this back to me now. I used to sit in the sauna every morning at the Sheraton gym with this guy Siegfried, who was the controller for the European Union. And I asked him what's that job like? He said, well, I sit down with the ministers, once a month, and they ask me, do we get the money? And I said, well, did you do A, B, and C? And they'd say, well, no, because Parliament didn't pass the law. And he said, okay, that's all right. And they said, so we get the money? No, but that's what. But that's what it was like. And I think it's a really, really important thing to
Hmm.
understand why Russia really never got off the ground and why
Yeah.
places like Poland did. And it's really important to understand about NATO ascension and EU
Yeah.
ascension. When you're
Yeah.
talking about EU ascension, you're not talking about joining a club. And same thing with NATO ascension. You're talking like a massive McKinsey project for an entire country. I mean, we've been
Hmm.
trying to do tax reform in this country
Uh-huh.
for 40 years and haven't
Mhm.
been able to do it because there's always going to be some special interest. Imagine, tax reform times 100,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Coming down to everything, agricultural policy,
Hmm.
real estate, contract law, everything needs to be brought into line.
Hmm.
So, and of course, every one of these things, there's going to be people who object. But in Poland at the time, in all of the Eastern European, they wanted to get away from the Russians so badly
Yeah.
that it was like they didn't want to hear it. You're either making your EU and NATO
Hmm.
ascension goals or you're not. Either you're on
Hmm.
plan or you're off plan. And that
Hmm.
became a litmus test for good government,
Hmm.
how the government was doing.
Whoa. Oh, that's so interesting. Well, so I already have like three questions buzzing in my mind, but maybe the next one that connects, and I think I'm hearing it correctly, is like, oh, you're saying all of the kind of key Eastern European countries that I can think of, former USSR, what I'm hearing you say is they were uh, ready to leave their USSR roots in the dust. They were hustling
Well,
to
not
achieve
former
these.
USSR, the Eastern Bloc countries.
Oh, yeah. Wait.
In former
Hmm.
USSR, they really didn't know quite as much. In Poland, the cool kid was the guy who
Yeah.
just got the care package from the relatives in Poland, in Chicago. So the
Yeah.
Poles knew they were being screwed that entire time.
Yeah.
In Ukraine, they
Oh,
really
that's
didn't.
Ooh, see, gosh, even that's an interesting data point that I wouldn't have thought to understand. That makes so much sense. Well,
And
so
and and what's also important to understand is that relationship between the Poles and the Ukrainians has done a 180. Because
yeah, I'm
before
tracking.
2004, the Poles, they would call the Ukrainians Russians, and
Yeah.
and that was not a compliment at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Um, and the and when I went over with a Polish-led company, and they were quite disrespectful to I mean, they were like, we say like the ugly Americans, they were like the ugly Poles. But then after, I remember traveling back to Poland in early 2005 after the Orange Revolution, and the road to the from the airport, there was like a long road in Warsaw. It's called Zwierki I Góry,
Hmm.
and there's a long fence there. And after the Orange Revolution, they had big signs for each of the each of the Eastern European revolutions, starting, of course, with Solidarity
Hmm.
and ending with the Orange Revolution. And it was like in that moment that they adopted the Ukrainians, and Ukrainians became nasha. They became ours. And that
Whoa.
changed the politics of the entire region.
Whoa. 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 Okay. Well, so let me. I think I'm totally tracking. I think what I'm always curious about in my reading of Ukraine in the last 5 years, and I want to test this on for size, is like, is it correct that post 92, 93, Poland was sprinting towards their national like independence and identity being separate from Russia? But would you say the same for Ukraine? Was it like,
No,
because I'm hearing it's not
not
one
in
to
the
one.
least.
It's
Even after
different.
2004, that wasn't it.
Yeah, I know. Add that.
So,
Give me that color commentary.
well, the Poles always, the Poles probably even more than the Ukrainians today hate the Russians. I mean,
Yeah.
there's such a deep-seated thing. It goes back to the 1920s, the
Yeah.
Warsaw Uprising, which where the Russian army sat across the river and waited for them to
Mhm.
finish killing all the Poles before they marched in. There's and the Russians with the Poles, by the way, there's a reason why they're encroaching on Polish airspace and not Baltics. I mean, there was a
Mm.
Russian colonel named Kuklinski who was spying for NATO, which was a big deal at the time. Most people have forgotten about it. They still have a big thing about Brzezinski and so many other things. So it for the Poles, they were motivated first by their hatred of Russia, but second, by what they felt as almost a lost birthright. They really felt European, and they felt that they were
Hmm.
being denied that all those years and being
Hmm.
subjugated by this palace of culture. Where the
Hmm.
Ukrainians felt like brothers to Russians, and that was
Hmm.
true. So what I think is important, I mean, people used to joke about Ukraine. It's like Poland in 1993 and always will be. That's, I mean, because you had this incredible entrepreneurship in Poland, and Poland was kind of, so once you get to the late 90s, early 2000s, Poland by this point is now sprinting ahead, right?
Yeah.
And remember, in 98 there was a ruble crisis. So 98 there's a ruble crisis, and that like impoverished everything, changed how everybody did business and everything. And there was and there was a central banker in Ukraine named Viktor Yushchenko who put in a lot of reforms
Yeah.
and really put the economy back on track. So now 2002, Ukraine is starting to grow very, very fast. 12% growth in
Mhm.
2002.
Gosh.
So and this is really, really important to remember. And it's funny, for my book I actually discussed this with a guy named Mustafa Nayem, who we'll get to later.
Hmm.
So now Ukraine is starting to do well, where for all of Soviet times it was, don't worry about politics, right?
Hmm.
Just worry about work, your family,
Yeah.
hopefully to go
Totally.
on one of those vacations. Now, think about what my parents-in-law have been through. They were through Chernobyl. They were through the ruble crisis. They were through all of this stuff. Now, finally, they're starting to get some breathing room, and they're starting to get some economic aspirations, right? Think about, so you're sitting here in Kyiv, you have friends, relatives, people who are working in Poland. They have Schengen visas. You have a restricted visa. You can't just travel
Hmm.
to United States or Europe. You can't
Hmm.
study wherever you want. You can't go. Why does Poland have all of those things and we have none of those things?
Hmm.
And that's really what the Orange Revolution was about. It wasn't
Whoa.
about, nobody was hungry for political transformation or
Hmm.
social transformation. It
Hmm.
was an economic ambition and a
Hmm.
reformer. Right? And you
Hmm.
had this guy Yushchenko, who, and
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to have dinner with him last year, and the worst politician ever. I mean, the type of person who could make, Alan Greenspan look
Look
uh,
riveting.
charismatic. I mean, I was at this event. His wife was translating for him. His wife's from Chicago and speaks, grew up in Chicago, speaks
Hmm.
obviously fluent English. She was translating for him. And I don't know how she did it, because what he was saying wasn't what she was. He's going off on tangents. He is, the least very professorial.
Yeah.
But then they poisoned him,
Mhm. Mhm.
and his face, you can see pictures of it. I mean, he was like a
Yeah.
good-looking guy.
Oh,
His
totally.
face was so terribly disfigured, and the Russians poisoned him, and he almost died.
Yeah.
And everybody thought he's going to have to drop out, but he didn't drop out. He gets out of the hospital. He marches down to Parliament, and he gets up and he points at his face and he says, "Look at my face. Look at my face so it doesn't have to happen to you." And in that moment, this boring, staid, professorial
Oh my
guy,
gosh.
terrible politician, turns into an inspirational
Oh,
figure.
a hero. Oh my gosh.
And he changed the course of history. And I got to ask him about it. And he said, "I just always believed in the spirit of the Ukrainian people."
Mm.
Here was this guy, no political talent, but he believed in his country and he changed the world.
Mm. Greg, you're telling that story so well. Oh my gosh. What an absolute hero. Well, that's everything that I've always known of him is like he's kind of like the new German PM, like Friedrich Merz, just a
Mertz.
banker. well educated, worked in the private sector, made all his money in finance, not known for his charisma. So of all things, for that individual, Yushchenko, to like really, maybe you tell me if you see it differently, but kickstart like one of the first like mass protests in the 2000s, because how I've read the history is that it felt like it was a binary decision of let me see if I can get his name right. It's Yushchenko versus Yanukovych, and Yanukovych is it the Russian puppet? Is that too strong of a term?
So
And that was kind
I
of the
don't think
decision.
I don't think it's correct to call him a Russian puppet.
Go ahead. I know. Yeah, you tell me.
And it's important to understand how Russia and Ukraine they're very, very different countries and very different cultures and extremely different people.
Yeah.
Ukraine's always been decentralized. There's, Russia, they say there's like 3 Russias. There's Moscow, St. Pete, where everything is centralized on. And then you have regional cities, and then you have the rest of the country, which is incredibly poor. And when I mean incredibly poor, I'm not talking like, Louisiana poor. I'm talking about, like Uganda poor.
Yeah.
So Russia's always been very, very centralized. Ukraine decentralized. So Ukraine was always divided between a number of different clans. So Kuchma, who was the outgoing guy, he was from Dnipropetrovsk, which is now called Dnipro. Yanukovych came out of Donetsk. So his patron was a guy named Akhmetov. So he was definitely a crook, and he was definitely Russian aligned.
Well, and just because I'm following, like, just real fast, Donetsk, part of the Donbass region, one of the oblasts or the provinces that like Russia is effectively seizing, right? So just for folks that like can't picture the map first person, that's how I understand it.
Yeah. So Donetsk and Lugansk are part of the Donbass region, which is the Donetsk Basin.
Yeah.
It's very sort of similar to Appalachia. Lots of, think of Pennsylvania, with Western Pennsylvania, with lots of coal mines and lots of steel mills. So a lot of Russians got sent there to work.
Got it.
And that's why it's a bit more Russian, but I wouldn't say it's a Russian speaking region.
Okay. Actually, which I always get in the news. Yeah.
Well, so not anybody who understands the country. They actually prefer to speak Syrzhyk there, which is a Creole of Russian and Ukrainian. But in most of the country, people are bilingual. So you can, for example, my wife, who's Ukrainian speaking, she, after the war started, she started with friends who she met in business, and they always spoke Russian. And they said, this is stupid. Let's speak Ukrainian. But we had 2 women in our office who would speak Ukrainian all the time. Even in business, in every meeting where other people were speaking Russian, they would speak Ukrainian. So if people would speak in Russian, they would speak Ukrainian, and they'd answer back in Russian, and never caused a problem. And nobody ever said it could cause a problem.
Golly. No, it's already so intriguing. So I'm gonna start fast forwarding because all this history is, I love that it's just laying such a foundation for like.
I do think it's important just to close this loop.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yushchenko becomes president. He wasn't a particularly good president.
Yeah.
He wasn't a particularly bad president either. But then the financial crisis came.
Yeah.
And after the Orange Revolution, I was talking with our editor, and he said, I remember we had this conversation, but everybody wanted to go to the Finnish model. That's what they said. To be neither East nor West. They wanted to go their own way. Then the financial crisis came. That's what really sunk Yushchenko. I'm not sure he wouldn't have won re-election if it wasn't for that. But with the financial crisis, which hit Ukraine much, much harder than in the United States, there was no way he was going to win. He was seen as weak and ineffective, but honest. And then that's what got Yanukovych to come in. And then he was an absolute nightmare. and you can edit this out, but Trump doesn't remind me of Putin, and he doesn't remind me of and he doesn't remind me of Erdogan either. He reminds me of Yanukovych.
Gosh.
But you can edit that
No,
out.
I'm
But
tracking. Now you got to explain what that means, because I think I know.
it was just a mad dash to it was a mad power and money grab.
Yeah,
I mean, it was terrible. Yeah. And I can tell you, to live under it, it was terrible. I mean, corruption isn't just economically corrosive, it's socially corrosive. I mean, it became harder and harder to run the country, because it's not just that the country is being run well, but it's not just the country is being run poorly. It's that to be run, it has to be, you have to dumb it down further and further, because competence is no longer valued, only loyalty is valued.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Right. So,
wow.
But then, and this is really important to understand, Yanukovych had promised, and he probably wouldn't have been elected if he hadn't made this promise, to go through with this EU association. EU association agreement. But Vladimir Putin had other ideas, because remember, Vladimir Putin was reelected in 2012. He had been prime minister in the interim, but he had he was pushing two things. One, which was a military alliance, which I forget exactly what it's called, but even more importantly, a Eurasian Economic Union is what it was called. So this idea that Yanukovych, this idea that Ukraine would join into a European an association with the EU, to him, he saw that as a threat to the Eurasian Economic Union. Or for whatever reason, he said no. There was nothing in that association agreement that would affect relations with Russia. And that's what triggered the Euromaidan. And that's when a guy named Mustafa Nayam said, this is enough. There had been sorry, you're making me relive this, but there had been something about 6 months before. It was a terrible case of this woman named Oksana Makar. Who was like this young woman who went out partying one night, and she went home with these three young boys, who then raped her and brutally and put her in the bathtub and burned her alive. And then you're going to want to edit this out, but just so, and then they dumped her in an abandoned lot, and somehow she survived, and she named her killers. But because one of them, his stepfather, worked at City Hall, the police let them go, and she made a video and it went viral. And this was, you have to remember, the reason why I tell you this is it's really important to understand what the mood was in the country, because it had turned so coarse and brazen. Basic services, they stopped cleaning the sidewalks of snow in Kyiv. Everybody was falling down, their arms were breaking, and at the same time, you would have these. They were called mazuri, which meant the children of oligarchs. You had them going into nightclubs and having their bodyguards rough up the bouncers or women. Or this one member of parliament, he gets stopped for speeding. He has his bodyguards get out and beat the shit out of the cop. And there was this feeling of just absolute lawlessness, that there was one set of these set of people that were above the law. And then this Oksana Makar thing happened. And everybody came out in the streets, and they call it going to the Maidan now because of 2004. Yeah. So this EU association came 6 months after that, and Mustafa Nayam's post on Facebook, and everybody goes to the Maidan. But here's the thing. 10 years after, this is almost 10 years after Orange Revolution. So those networks were still there. People still remembered those days and how to do it, but it was different this time. And this is one of the most important things we talk about in terms of change, the failure to survive victory. And everybody who's ever had a startup knows what the failure to survive victory is. But in change, failure to survive victory is always a failure to uh, root yourself in shared values,
Hmm.
usually because of some differentiating value. But that's when you know that's what you really need to survive victory, those shared values. So this was different, where the Orange
Mhm.
Revolution was about economic ambition.
Hmm.
Euromaidan and the Revolution of Dignity was about the acknowledgement that they can't have those things if they don't adopt these values.
Hmm.
And so both of them, the name tells you what the revolution was about. Orange Revolution was called orange because orange was the campaign color of Yushchenko. It was
Yeah.
about putting Yushchenko in the presidency.
Yeah.
Euromaidan was about values, about adopting European values. And that's
Hmm.
why it's continued to survive even after Yanukovych left, even after the interim government, even after Petro Poroshenko became president,
Yeah.
even after he gets removed
Hmm.
in an election, and you have three leaders removed. But
Hmm.
the values of the Euromaidan revolution live
Yeah.
on because they have nothing to do with they have nothing to do with
Hmm.
Poroshenko or Zelensky or any other leader.
Yeah. Gosh, Greg, this is so good. I'm seeing it. I'm feeling it. I feel like I can
Well,
put myself in their
I
shoes.
think everybody in Silicon Valley understands that your business needs to be about something more than your own ambition or
Yeah.
what you think, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
totally.
and every time you start thinking your business is about you, you start running it in a bad way, and
Hmm.
you can see businesses that
Mhm.
they start going the wrong way.
Hmm.
And the failure to survive victory is always about the failure to adopt and stay rooted in shared values,
In shared value.
usually in favor of some differentiating value that allows you to signal identity and status. That's how you
Hmm.
know when a
Hmm.
revolution is going bad. That's how you know when a social program is going bad, and that's how you know when a business is going bad.
Yeah. Gosh, we could connect the dots to the U.S., but I'm gonna stay in Ukraine because I think I'm now I think like able to empathize with the average Ukrainian in 2022 when Putin's tanks start lining up on the border. And of the elements that I was maybe surprised by is that, like, man, at the time, polling amongst the average Ukrainian to fight back, man, send their sons into battle, it hovered in that 70% range for like two
Well,
or
they
three
didn't have a
years.
choice.
I know. Well, so like, I think I can imagine what they felt the stakes were. But like, man, you're married. It sounds like married to a Ukrainian. Like, what do the stakes feel like for now? Some of your family members that are still in Ukraine. Why is it so existential?
Well, what? Well, I would answer this in a couple of different ways because
Yeah.
I have, I lived in Ukraine for almost 10 years, so I have family there, but I also have different friends
Yeah. A
who,
huge community.
but I think and different people have different perspectives. My one of my best friends was our chief editor and would have almost surely been on any list,
Yeah.
any kill list.
Yeah.
So he had to get out of Kyiv immediately. Um, Other friends I have stayed there to report, but it's funny to hear people in America call peace. Well, that we want peace, where a Ukrainian would say, well, if peace means that they're going to kill our men, rape our
Hmm.
women, and kidnap our children, that's not a peace we want.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's no peace for
Gosh.
us.
No. Yeah. Not at all. Um. And man, maybe like help. I don't know, the naysayers or whatever. Maybe the members in my community who aren't that worried about Putin. It's like, oh well, it's better to have him on our side than Xi's side in China. Like, respond to that. Like, hey, what is what makes your certainty, or what drives your certainty that, like, hey, peace doesn't that kind of peace doesn't exist. The kind of world that Putin is trying to build in Ukraine is It's
What about
just
the
it's
world
not
he's
one.
trying to build in Russia?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Keep going.
I mean, without being alarmist, right? So let's say you're running a startup in Russia, right? And you're doing pretty well, right? You're making money, you're doing well. What if somebody decides that they want your business? What if somebody in some ministry, you don't know that you're not that somebody from the tax ministry isn't going to show up tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can never be secure ever, and that's if you're an elite person. If you're not an elite person, anybody can do anything to you.
Hmm.
I mean, your children are not safe. I mean, what if you have a daughter and she gets attacked, right? If the right person attacks her, you would have no recourse.
Hmm. Hmm.
In the occupied areas, not only are people, I mean, first of all, they're being run by criminals because,
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin has some big problems now, and I don't want to go
Mhm.
into too many of them, but one is he's got a personnel problem. So, and
Mhm.
anybody who's run a startup knows what it's like, right? So you have a group, that you start with, and then you're going through, then you get your VC funds, and you're going through this massive growth, and then you're doing well, and you're growing more, and everybody who comes into your company, right? And you go and recruit people, and it's like, man, you come here, you're going to get stock options. We're growing like
Mhm.
crazy. You're poaching from Microsoft, Google. Microsoft or Google can't offer them what you can offer them because you are growing like
Mhm.
hockey stick growth. The future
Yeah.
looks great. Then what happens after a couple of years? Maybe you have a good run. I was talking to a friend of mine at Stripe, which is still really good business,
Mhm.
but they're
Mhm.
not 10xing anymore.
No.
So now you have an HR problem because now you're bringing people in, but you can't give them what you gave the guys who came earlier, the
Yeah.
people, girls,
Yeah.
they,
I'm
whatever,
tracking.
whoever they.
Sure.
So that, and everybody who's built who's built a business knows that problem. Now
Hmm.
Putin has that problem,
Hmm.
right? Because the older guys, the guys who are in their 60s and 70s, they got their franchise. They got their, Rosneft and their share of the minerals or oil wells or whatever it
Hmm.
was.
Hmm.
But the guys coming up in their 50s, they need a piece of something. They either have to take it from the older guys or they need to get it somewhere else.
Hmm.
One of the places they can get it is in occupied territories in Ukraine.
Whoa. I get it.
Another place they can get it is in Africa, which they have a big problem with the Africa business now because they lost their bases in Syria.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's a big problem. So the people who are coming uh, to run the places in Ukraine, the occupied territories, they're not just it's not just that they have a mandate to eradicate not only Ukrainians but any shred of Ukrainian culture or language,
Hmm.
but they're being run for profit.
Hmm.
I mean, they're the people who are getting those franchises. They have license to loot whatever they can get.
Oh
So,
God.
y- you know, do you really want to import that to the United States? And by the way, you look at American kids, right? They're writing papers, right? They're using Grammarly. They're using
Mhm.
lots of other technology. That's not a Russian company. Grammarly's not a Russian company. It's a Ukrainian company.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's like over a dozen Ukrainian
Mhm.
unicorns. And
Yeah.
they did it without VCs. They've only had VCs in Ukraine for a couple of years because for 30 years, Ukraine has been the key outsourcing
Correct.
uh, uh, place in Europe. I mean, that's what drove. I remember during the financial crisis, our development costs went up, even though
Hmm.
the Ukrainian economy took a hit because it was everybody in Europe
Mhm.
trying to hire the Ukrainian developers to save
Hmm.
money. But so a lot of those guys, they went out and they said, hey, we've had enough of building stuff for Google or whoever. We can go build this for ourselves. And that's what they did. They do not create software in Russian or Ukrainian.
Yeah.
They have American sounding names. They to all appearances, they are an American company. Everything they do
Totally.
is English.
Totally.
So who do you want as an ally? Do you want as an ally the entrepreneurial, scrappy, European people who are winning the war? Or do you want the corrupt, the corrupt gas station that's losing the war?
Yeah.
And at this point, I wouldn't say Russia is quite losing the war yet, but we're in an inflection.
Totally.
And it's not, Ukraine has a path to winning this war. Russia does not. And they've taken out about 20% of, and I don't want to get too much into this because I'm not an expert, obviously a military expert, but I don't think the current course is sustainable for Russia. Of course, I've always been overly optimistic, but
yeah. Well, let me chime in because I follow this one closely, and there really are kind of these phases to every war. But now, if I were to just click right into like what's the last 6 to 12 months looks like, it's these stagnant boundary lines where Russia's hovered at that quite literally, it's like 19% of Ukraine territory for a year now with very little expansion. And then what that
Pakras has been ready to fall in 3 days for the last 18 months.
For a while now, for quite some time. Totally. But now here's where I connect the dots it's one of these little taglines that I read that I was so intrigued by is that kind of war therefore places far more emphasis on technology, particularly drone technology, and the rate of Ukraine's AI advancements in these like crazy, they're called like drone swarms, where they coordinate and they have this precision targeting that can't get jammed. And it really is almost like what I'm used to on Uber versus Lyft. It's two tech teams trying to get an upper hand on each other. And right now, this one journalist that I follow quite literally said, I would bet on Ukraine winning this war, even though they have a 4 times smaller population. They started the war with 10 times smaller economy, 10 times fewer military aircraft and heavy weaponry, like a huge statistical disadvantage. And yet, if this war ends up turning into a technological battlefield, I'm betting on Ukraine, which I just find that such a unique like world that we're entering into.
Who was the reporter?
I'm gonna look it up. It's they were on if you know Hoover Institute at Stanford. They cited him, and I was like,
it's probably not a reporter. It's probably an analyst.
Sure. Yes, that's the better word to say.
By the way, Christopher Miller is one of our ex guys, but
no way. That's cool.
He's a damn good reporter. And that's part of the problem as well. A reporter is somebody who's actually reporting, meaning they're on the location, not somebody.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Here's how I would put what I think you're trying to say. I remember in 2007, the iPhone launches. So you needed to remember you could only use the iPhone with a particular, what do you call it? Carrier.
Yeah.
Let me say this again because it's important. 2007, iPhone launches. You needed to use an iPhone with a particular carrier everywhere in the world, except for Ukraine, because they didn't bother with Ukraine.
Yeah.
2 weeks after that launch, you take your iPhone, you could get it jailbroken on Krishadik for $20. That's how I got my first iPhone. Ukrainians did everything that way. Ukrainians hack everything. Because they never had anything. They never had their own. You wanted satellite TV? Nobody would sell it to you. You need to hack your satellite TV. You want to watch a movie? You need to hack your movie. They hacked everything because they had to. So you have a nation of hackers fighting a nation that got all their tanks stuck in a 40-mile line because their commanders were selling diesel. That's what corruption is. When you can't run your army because your commanders are selling it. Who do you want? Who do you want to be on the side of? The hackers or the ones who are selling their own gas?
Yeah. No kidding. Well, so we're going to do the like peer into the crystal ball, both like what
We
world do
talk
you
nothing
hope?
about change, by the way.
No,
It's
I
okay.
know, but no, I'm well, I'll find a way to incorporate this. That like so much of your work today is around change management, and I think we're touching on
I
these
don't call
topics
it
in these
change
really interesting
management.
ways.
It's because what change management is actually a
Yeah,
specific discipline
sure.
with
Yeah.
specific methodologies, and what I do has nothing to do with that.
Okay. Well, there we go. I'm setting you up for the ultimate like elevator pitch. You describe it in your own words.
So we have decades of studies, right? And it's all, and we know essentially four things about change. The first is it always comes from the outside and incurs resistance. We know this from the very first studies on hybrid corn and
Hmm.
on tetracycline.
Hmm.
The second is it follows an S curve, right? So it starts off slowly, and then if it things go well, eventually it hits an inflection point, and then triggers a cascade and exponential growth. And we even know that
Hmm.
that inflection point is usually 10 to 20% participation. Again, we know
Hmm.
this from hundreds of studies. We know that there's something called a cap gap, meaning that
Hmm.
shifts in knowledge and attitudes don't uh don't result in shift in practice. We might know we shouldn't eat the cookie, doesn't mean we're not going to eat the cookie. And in every
Yeah.
organization, there's knowing doing gaps. And
Hmm.
probably the most important is that uh, change is always uh, change is always uh, propagated through peer networks. We adopt
Hmm.
the changes we want to see. We
Hmm.
we adopt the changes we see around us, not the
Hmm.
ones that that we just hear about or that people are preaching or telling us about.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's really the key to understand how change is propagated. It's
Hmm.
always through networks, which makes it nonlinear.
Hmm.
So does not really follow the type of waterfall project management approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what
Oh,
we've seen in Ukraine as well,
totally.
because that's where I first learned it all. That's where I learned that there, you know, we grow up thinking that there's a certain order to things, and uh, and that power works in a particular way.
Hmm.
But what I learned during the Orange Revolution is that all these people, nobody with any conventional form of power had any ability to shape events at all, and that
Hmm.
it was small groups loosely connected but
Wow.
united by a shared purpose that was
Yeah.
driving everything along.
Wow. Wow. No, I'm
And
loving it. I'm getting it.
that's why and I'm sure some of your listeners would be familiar with the OODA loop, right?
Hmm.
John Boyd thing. But that's why Ukraine is winning this war and Russia is losing this war. Russia has very poor networks, and
Hmm.
it's because the corrupt structures make it very difficult for information to flow where it needs to flow.
Yeah.
So they essentially have broken their own networks, where Ukrainian networks are tightly coupled.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, I dig that, and it makes sense to me. Well, so here's I think maybe one of the places that will start to like come to a close is in light of that concept. What's your hope for Ukraine versus Russia? And maybe if you even want to like expand and include any other of those like Eastern European nations like Poland that you spent time in. Like what do you
Well,
foresee the
so
next decade looking like?
yeah, I what I've seen is that every nation has its own ambition. America's was what used to be the land of the free. We'll see how that goes.
Hmm. Hmm.
French has always been the center of culture.
Yeah.
For the Poles, it was to be European.
Hmm.
That's at least what it was 20 years ago. I'm sure it's
Hmm.
changed. For the Ukrainians, it was always to be left alone.
Hmm.
But again, I think that's changing as well. Now, I think Ukrainians, I think its national ethos is in flux. I mean, if you would have told me when when I first got to the country in 2002 that Ukraine would be at war with Russia, I wouldn't have believed you. If you would
Yeah.
have told me that they would be winning, I would think you're on drugs. But if you told me that the most admired leader in the world would be the Ukrainian president, I mean, that would have just been absolutely unfathomable to me. But, and I think I told you before we got on that what Viktor Yushchenko, the former president, what he told me, it was a small dinner, it was like 12 people, that he did what he did. He was able to muster the courage that he did because he believed in the spirit of the Ukrainian people. And I think that is true. And what I encourage people to do is to go on YouTube and look for a video of Chervona Kalina. And there's my favorite one, if you've seen the song, was a Ukrainian girl in Lithuania. And listen to that song and then go read the lyrics and then realize that song, which was about Ukrainian independence, dates from the late 19th century. This has been 150 years that they've been fighting for their independence, fighting to keep their language, their culture, their Ukrainian spirit free. These people have been beaten.
Gosh. Oh, Greg, that's so good. Wow, man, we're like right at the hour mark. I know that we covered way more of kind of the like geopolitical
Well,
side
you
of
can have
things.
me back again. So
I know that's my setup, but maybe here's how we'll close. Is I just give one more like shout out to the work that you do, particularly with businesses today, and then ultimately how folks can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So what I think is most important to understand about change movements and change in an industry and change in an organization is that change really needs to be empowered.
Yeah.
Right? You can't change things yourself. You can't even really lead change. What you can do is empower people to succeed and to spread that success to others. And that's true in Ukraine today. It's true in any startup, and it's true in any organization that needs to adopt something new.
I think like so many of my friends are trying to keep up with what's going on in the Ukraine-Russian war, but don't have nearly the context and frankly the love for the Ukrainian people that you do. So this was such a differentiated conversation that I really enjoyed.
Well, I'm glad we could do it.
Another episode is a wrap, and I'll see everybody this time next week.